Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Joining the Imperial Navy is seen as one of the most prestigious careers in the Galactic Empire. That's because outside of the core regions of the galaxy and some of the more populated centers in the Outer Rim, there just wasn't much economic opportunity. Working for the Galactic Empire, either as a bureaucrat or as a member of the armed forces, was considered a reasonably good position to have. And in the military hierarchy, joining the fleet was considered one of the more lucrative postings, and could potentially lead to great economic and political rewards. The Imperial Naval Academy only accepted the most intelligent and ruthless individuals. The end goal for most of these cadets was to eventually captain a rated vessel in His Majesty's Imperial Navy. The ultimate posting was becoming the captain of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, a position that was quite similar to becoming a mayor of a small city. At 1.6 kilometers long, with tens of thousands of Imperials on board, one needed great management skills and leadership skills. For some, the power and control alone was intoxicating and everything they desired. Now, a lot of people don't realize that these captains were also responsible for the logistics on these vessels, procuring contracts for resupply, for food, munitions, fuel, and all sorts of other things, especially those that were not supplied by the Imperial Navy itself. Each IST captain is given a budget for procurement, and it's here that a captain could really grow their own personal wealth through corruption and bribes. You see, suppliers oftentimes fought each other for these very lucrative contracts with the Imperial Navy. When an ISD arrives to an Outer Rim territory, it's like a cruise ship arriving in the Caribbean, doubling the population of that territory overnight. These contracts were large enough to make a vendor's year, or maybe even decade. And so, people were more than willing to give the captains of these ships all sorts of gifts and kickbacks in order to secure said contracts. And without proper checks and balances from the Navy internally or from third-party watchdog organizations or the media, this type of corruption was rampant and attracted those who sought financial enrichment to this position. As a higher-ranking naval officer, you also get a chance to rub shoulders with the political elites in the galaxy and potentially even find more economic and political opportunities for when you eventually leave the service. The Imperial military was just simply one of the largest organizations in the galaxy, and so the resources they controlled were enormous. There were plenty of vultures and other types of scavengers looking for their own piece. There is, however, another pathway in the Imperial Navy that requires a very similar amount of skill, intelligence, and ruthlessness that you might need to become a bridge officer, and that is becoming a starfighter pilot. There's plenty of glory and nobility in becoming a starfighter pilot. They're sort of like the modern knights of the battlefield, but since these are not major command positions with a lot of political power, it's a far more thankless career path. Combine that with the high death rates, and one wonders why anyone would choose to be a pilot over serving on the bridge of a Star Destroyer. Well, I guess you have to hop in a cockpit of an interceptor to truly understand the thrill and joy of flying yourself. In today's video, we're going to take a look at a collection of Imperial and Rebel pilots who stayed in the cockpit long after they needed to. Some of these individuals even refused to accept promotions because they didn't want an administrative job or a desk job. They wanted to stay flying. These are special individuals who cherish the rush of combat and flight over career advancement. They also brought in valuable skill and experience to frontline units and were huge morale boosters for those they served with. Although one could argue it was also kind of dumb to risk these very valuable assets in such dangerous situations. One of the reasons why U.S. airmen were able to dominate their Japanese counterparts in the latter years of the war in the Pacific during World War II was the fact that experienced Allied pilots usually were rotated off of the front lines. Sometimes these pilots were even stationed stateside, where they would take their knowledge and experience and train the next generation of American fighter pilots. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which started lagging behind in resources, technology, equipment, and manpower when compared to their American counterparts, didn't have that same luxury. As a result, Japanese aces were required to fly until they either died or were seriously wounded and couldn't fly anymore. So while the average skill of the American pilot continued to increase throughout the conflict, the Japanese pilot was of a much lower quality towards the end of the conflict, which was one of the reasons why kamikaze attacks were used. The Galactic Empire, especially during more peaceful times, could afford to rotate frontline pilots or pilots who were going on patrol to the rear, where they could also spread their valuable insight and knowledge that they've gained from fighting. This more or less stopped after the Battle of Yavin and the destruction of the Death Star, which took out most of the elite pilots in the galaxy. Prior to that calamity, there were plenty of very skilled Imperial pilots, individuals like Captain Volscaris. As a combat ace, he was amongst the elite few who bore the yellow stripes and red markings on his flight gear. He was constantly flying the latest platforms from the TIE Interceptor to later on the TIE Defender. His list of killed vessels ranged from the swift Rebel A-Wing to unarmed civilian transports. Due to his real-world combat experience and his willingness to kill civilians, Volscaris was the perfect candidate to serve as one of the lead instructors of Skystrike Academy, where he could pass on his ruthless view of aerial combat to the next generation of cadets.
The rebels are a desperate group of extremists. They'll fight with any ship using any means necessary to undermine our authority. That is why orders must be followed without question. Insubordination like yours will get you and your wingman killed. Understood?
And if you actually don't take into account that the Empire is an authoritarian dictatorship that brutally oppresses the galaxy and generally creates worse outcomes for most of its citizens, what he's saying is technically true. I mean, the rebels will go to extreme lengths in order to win against the Empire, and so your average TIE fighter pilot definitely needs to be very vigilant and follow orders. There's a real possibility that that officer might have a bigger picture view of what's going on, and they'll know things that you don't. And so when you're asked to attack a unarmed civilian transport, there might be a good reason for this. But anyway, the idea is the individual pilot is just a tool, and the responsibility for any action falls on the commanding officer who issues the order. Or at least that's how it's supposed to work. You know, a lot of Star Wars fans believe that if they were in the Star Wars galaxy, they would never serve the Empire. Well, I think it's not really that simple. I don't think a lot of Imperials thought they were villains or knew what they were doing was bad. Most people are simply focused on a career path of some sort and staying alive rather than the political consequences of the faction they were supporting. That was kind of above most people's pay grade. And once one reaches that pay grade, like Volscaris, they were given a cushier role in the Empire where they were usually separated from the combat by a few meters of reinforced durasteel armor plating and bulkhead. Volscaris, however, would eventually return to combat duty after serving as a test pilot for the TIE Defender program under Grand Admiral Thrawn. This came with a promotion to commander, and I'm sure Volt was eager to hop into the pilot of the newest and most advanced TIE fighter in the Imperial fleet. I think most pilots would. And the idea of going on specialized and highly important missions to test out the platform's capabilities was just a dream come true. But as talented as Volscaris was, the life of a TIE fighter pilot, even one piloting the well-armored and shielded Defender, is still quite limited, and eventually his luck would run out. The X-Wing that shot him down was piloted by none other than Hera Syndulla, daughter of Twi'lek revolutionary Cham Syndulla. From a young age, this girl was hanging around pretty rough and tough characters and had access to very high-level military-grade starships.
What type of ship is this?
A modified Omicron-class attack shuttle.
Can I have a look inside?
Hunter, can she come aboard?
Her first taste of combat was alongside her father fighting against the Empire. She was comfortable flying multiple crafts, including A-Wings, Y-Wings, X-Wings. She was also the first test pilot for the B-Wing prototype. She would also fly a variety of different freighters and larger ships as well. Phoenix Cell would play a huge role in the defeat of the Imperial garrison on Lothal, along with its sector fleet and Grand Admiral Thrawn's 7th Fleet. Similar to Volscaris, Hera Syndulla was assigned to train the next generation of starfighter pilots, and eventually became the commander of the Lucrehulk Prime, a giant separatist battleship that was converted into a flight school for the rebellion. Now, Hera Syndulla would reach the rank of general. I don't know why in Star Wars naval officers have that rank, but they do, and she would be given control of the cruiser Geist, and also she would be put in charge of Gamma Group, which was several rebel warships. Despite being so highly ranked at the Battle of Endor, Hera Syndulla would return to the cockpit of her Ghost and pilot it during the Battle of Endor and other engagements. This is simply unheard of. You simply don't see individuals as highly ranked as Hera Syndulla return to the battlefield in command of a ship that's not even rated. Wedge Antilles actually started out his career as a promising Imperial pilot candidate beneath catapult Scarus at the Skystrike Academy. Apparently, Wedge wasn't a huge fan of the Imperial attitude, and with the help of Harrison Doua's Phoenix Cell, he was able to defect to the rebellion. Wedge Antilles' limited experience in training was still quite useful for the young Rebel Starfighter Corps. He would serve in Phoenix Squadron and eventually join up with Red Squadron during the pivotal Battle of Yavin 4. He, along Luke Skywalker and one other pilot, were the only survivors of that incident. Luke and Wedge would go on to establish Rogue Squadron, a name dedicated to the heroic sacrifice of the Rogue One team that had stolen the Death Star plans. Antilles would serve alongside Luke and eventually was promoted to commander of the unit when Luke lost his hand and started going on his little spirit journey. Probably should have went to Burning Man instead of Dagobah. Wedge Antilles was entrusted with finding new candidates for this unit, and that was something he really didn't want to do. You see, Wedge was actually a pretty terrific leader. He just was a reluctant leader who much more preferred flying and minding his own business. This is probably why he never accepted a higher command position as well. Wedge Antilles would eventually grow into his squadron commander position, but throughout the conflict, he would refuse several promotions by Rebel High Command to put him in a senior rank. He would successfully participate in Operation Starlight, an attempt to find the scattered portions of the Rebel fleet after their defeat at Hoth. He would also support Project Starhawk, an attempt to build an advanced Republic battleship that was supposed to rival the Imperials. Somehow, Wedge Antilles managed to stay in the cockpit until the very end of the Galactic Civil War. It's actually rumored that he turned down promotions at least half a dozen times. During the New Republic era, he would train pilots for the New Republic Defense Force and take a break from the front. Anton Merrick and Garvin Dryce both served in the Virijansi Rarefied Air Force. This was a planetary defense force that was essentially disbanded by the Empire and rolled into the Imperial Navy. Both Dryce and Merrick found the Imperial Navy contract for service to be less than ideal, and upon studying the doctrine of the Imperial Navy, disliked the rigidity of the system and how little emphasis the Empire placed on pilot safety and individual expression of violence. The two would join the Rebel Alliance pretty early on, and together they would form the Rebel Alliance Starfighters Doctrine and help select the X-Wing platform as the main starfighter for the Rebellion, and they were also instrumental in incorporating the U-Wing platform into the Rebel Starfighters formations. General Anton Merrick would be made commander of the entire Rebel Starfighter Corps, and Dryce would reach the rank of commander and be put in charge of Red Squadron. Despite the wealth of knowledge and experience that both of these individuals had, they still took on command positions in the field. Anton Merrick would lead Blue Squadron during the Battle of Scarif, and he would manage to sneak in a small Rebel attachment through the shield gate before it shut down. Unfortunately, Merrick would be trapped in the atmosphere of Scarif, but he did manage to provide close air support to Rebel ground forces on numerous occasions before he was finally trapped and shot down by Imperial TIE Strikers, which were purpose-built to fly in atmosphere. This was really a huge waste, if you think about it, because Anton Merrick was a pilot at heart and a commander second, and so he truly understood how to work with this small fledgling starfighter corps and handle the morale issues that generally plagued this unit because it was so underfunded. Garvin Dryce would meet his own end during the trench run on the Death Star during the Battle of Yavin 4. He actually managed to get a proton torpedo shot off against the ventilation shaft, which is quite impressive considering his lack of force skills. His experience was also quite hard to replace. The Rebel Alliance Starfighter Command struggled quite a lot, especially in the earlier years of the war. They were constantly undermanned and being forced to fly more hours than probably advisable. Yet this unit still outperformed other parts of the Rebel Navy and Army, and this is a testament to the foundation that these two individuals set up. The Rebel Starfighter Corps remained one of the most potent forces the Rebel Alliance had against the Empire. It also do the most damage in the war, taking out both Death Stars. So there you have it, guys. That is our list of pilots who refused to get promoted out of the cockpit. Let me know in the comment section below if I've missed any of your favorites, and also don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.